or just on a personal aspect. I've been practicing Zen Buddhism for about 15 years, which is hard to believe. But I guess I'll just tell you kind of a little bit about my background and why I got interested in it, and then try to explain a little bit about Buddhism, which I think is kind of challenging to do. But first of all, I guess I would like to know, do any of you have knowledge of Buddhism? Have you studied it? You know a little bit about it?
There's a YouTube channel called Useful Charts. He has a religion series where he goes over history of religious denominations. I know that label doesn't apply to all religions. He mentions that.
Yeah.
He went over I watched his video on the history of it, so all I have is like real rough overview.
Okay, so that's probably all I can give you either. And part of that is because as I'll go into more I guess the strand of Buddhism that I study in is not very interested in the intellectual understanding of what it is. It's really a focus on the practice of meditation. And that's one of the things that drew me to it. And so I guess I'll just talk a little bit more about my spiritual background, just partly because that's what I'm always interested in. Other people, like, why do you believe what you believe, or, you know, and what was your background growing up and those kinds of things. So I guess I'll just talk a little bit about that. I grew up in a family, I would just say my mother was an atheist and my father was probably more agnostic, bordering atheist, but they both grew up in very religious households that they found they had very unhappy experiences with their very religious families. And so they just completely rejected that. So I didn't really have, you know, except when I went to visit the grandparents and then I would go to church with them. That was really my experience with Christianity until I went to college. But, you know, of course I had those, you know, kids on the playground telling me I was going to go to hell and those kinds of things.
Where was that, Lynn? What part of the country were you?
I grew up in a little tiny farm town in Illinois, called Mount Carroll, Illinois. And for the most part, I found in the Midwest that people don't tend to focus nearly as much on religion as they do down here. It was more of a private thing. Like, I wouldn't even really know what churches my friends went to or anything like that. It wasn't really something they talked about much at school, but except I had this one Catholic friend that was telling me I was going to hell. So I remember going home one day, like, really scared, talking to my dad and like, am I going to hell? And he just told me, you know, this was his explanation, like, Christianity is just a mythology, just like you study the Greek myths and they have their gods, and, you know, the Christians are the same. It's a mythology. It's just a belief that people exist down here, but it's not real. You know, that's what he told me. So I found that reassuring. And that's just kind of what I went with. And then, of course, when I was in college, I don't know, you may have experienced this too, but of course I had the Christian friends that wanted to convert me. So I went through my little phases of, you know, trying to go to Bible studies and or go to church sometimes with people. And I was always fascinated. I think I've always been fascinated by spirituality and religion. But that Christian message just never really clicked with me. Like, it never made sense to me that there would just be like one true religion and there would be this like egotistical God that couldn't stand it if anybody didn't believe in him, and then he would just condemn them to be in hell for eternity. Like, that just never appealed to me. So and I had a couple experiences in college of meditating. And I think I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which is like his fictionalized, you know, story of the Buddha. And so I was kind of interested in it, but I didn't really pursue anything with it. I did have a profound experience of in meditation that, you know, somewhere I was visiting, they just had like a visiting teacher do a meditation with us. And I had a momentary experience of, it's not really something you need to put into words, but just like total unification with myself. Like that chatter brain that had never stopped for 1 second, I don't think ever since I first had language, like that dropped away, and I just experienced myself in this state of just oneness, and that was very profound for me. And so that intrigued me, but I didn't really, know how to access that again. So that just sort of lay dormant in the back of my mind for a long time. And then, when I was living here and I had young children and I was going through a really difficult time in my life, and I felt like I wanted some kind of spirituality, that would be fortifying for me. And so, again, I had some Christian friends and I tried, going to church with them a little bit. And again, I just had that same feeling of like, this just doesn't make sense to me. And I was trying to remember today, I can't even remember how I found out that there is like actually a Zen dojo in Starkville. I don't know if I saw it in the newspaper. I think, I don't know. I don't know how I found out about it, but I was like, what? There's a Zen dojo in Starkville? Or maybe I remembered that meditation experience, and so I just looked on the internet to see if I could find something.
So what's the Zen dojo?
So the dojo is just the word for where you practice. It's the same word for if you practice martial arts.
Okay.
So it's just the space where you practice.
Okay. So it's not like a church, it's not like a synagogue. A temple is just a space.
Yeah, and it would be, I guess it would be the equivalent. It's where you practice the religion, which I don't really even like to think of Buddhism as a religion, because that word carries so many connotations, and I guess there's all, different people feel differently about it, but, so, I called, the number and I talked to the teacher, and he, described what they do. They would sit for 30 minutes and then they would do this chanting and walking meditation and then sit again. And it sounded very formal and sort of, I was like, I don't know, that sounds a little much for me. And so I didn't go right away. But then I just was back there in the background. So then at one point I just decided, like, oh, I'm going to try this. So I called him back and he said, well, we're actually doing a sesshin this weekend. So a sesshin is a longer period. It can be a full day, 2 days, 3 days, where you sit like every hour all day long. And he's like, we're having one this weekend. And I was like, okay, I'll just dive in. So I just went in and you don't sit all day. You have periods where you sit and then you have walking meditation. Then you work around the dojo cleaning and different things, and you have meals together and things. So it's not just solid sitting all day long, but it's a lot of sitting and being with yourself. So he showed me how to sit in the posture, which is, you've probably seen, many pictures of people sitting there cross-legged. And I find that very comfortable, and thankfully in the Soto Zen that I practice, they also very much accept another position where you turn your cushion, which is called a zafu. You can turn it on its side, and then you can sit on it with your knees on either side of it, so you don't have to sit in that cross-legged position, because I could never do that. So thankfully they offer that alternative posture. So just sitting there on the cushion all day and then just paying attention to your breath as it goes in and out. And I'm incredibly bad at it. I'm still incredibly bad at it. But the thing I love about it is that the focus is not on doing it right. It's just on noticing what's actually happening. So noticing that your mind is wandering. And so the precept of Buddhism is that we are human beings are always going to have to experience pain, but that because of our mind, our monkey mind that's always chattering, we are oftentimes creating suffering that we don't have to experience, and that we layer that suffering on top of the pain. And part of that is because we can't stay in the present moment. We can't sit with pain and feel it and let it move through. Instead, we create these stories about it. We're always going into our past and dredging up all the stuff from there. And we're always going to the future and trying to plan how we're going to have control over these things so we're going to feel better. And we can't just sit in the moment with it, what is. And so that's all really meditation is, just trying to, sit on the cushion, notice your breath, notice when your mind starts wandering, notice what you're thinking about, and then just come back to your breath again and again and again. And that's why it's called a practice, because you're just practicing that over and over and over again. And as you do that, you're just kind of amazed what you find in there, and a lot of times there is a lot of pain. I mean, many times when I go to sit, I will just find myself crying and I didn't even know, like, I wasn't even conscious that something was bothering me. But then when you just sit there in the quiet and you tune into your body and allow what's there, what will come up is this stuff that you've been stuffing down and avoiding with all the brain chatter. And then other times it is these experiences of, when that chatter does fall away, you can have these incredible moments where you're just hearing the birds outside and there's nothing else. Like you're just hearing the birds and you're just one with it. And it's like a moment of transcendence. And so I guess that is like the tiny little bit of, what the Buddha called the awakening, the enlightenment is that moment when you're just in that oneness. And again, it's something you can't really put into words. The words kind of diminish the experience, but so that's where we're always in that quest, in that practice to try to be in that present moment and experiencing that the unity as opposed to the opposites, which language by design makes everything separate. We have to label this thing, and then there's something that's that thing, and then I'm separate from that thing. And so one of the principles of Buddhism is that we're not actually separate, that's an illusion that we've created. And it's an illusion that you need to function a lot of times in your day-to-day life, right? Because we're crippled, there are sects, like I think they're called the Jainists, who, they sweep, everywhere before they walk so that they don't kill any, little tiny organisms or anything, that, that's so admirable, but also makes it hard to, get anywhere, right? So we have to, sometimes we have to adopt this idea that we're separate from everything else. But if we stay always in that separation, it does cause a lot of suffering. And you can see that, in our current political climate, the us and them, we know that everything is interconnected, and that if you're causing pain and suffering for these people, that's going to have a ripple effect and affect everyone. But this monkey mind can tell us that we're separate and that we don't have anything to do with those people over there or that phenomenon over there. So I think a lot of the reason that the Zen Buddhism appeals to me is because it's a lot of there's not really that dogma that there are with other religions. There's nothing in particular that you have to believe. It's really, do you want to sit and pay attention to your breath? That's really the only prerequisite for you to sit. And you can have other beliefs as well. You can be, there are Christians who are also Zen Buddhists, and that I just find that so kind of revolutionary for our spiritual beliefs to be so open to the idea that there's no one right thing, that each person has to find their own truth through the exploration of their own breath. And then it's they say Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. So whereas the atheists would say that there is no God, and the agnostics might say there might or there might not be, the non-theistic religion is just not really concerned with that. It's really concerned with how do I live my life in an ethical way, in a principled way, and it's and I like also that it's particularly the type of Zen that I practice, which is called Soto Zen. So just like every religion that has spread out, so just for those of you who don't know, or to give a little refresher, and again, I'm not by any means an expert on Buddhism, but the Buddha lived in India, I think in about 500 BC, and like all religious figures, it's hard to know what of it, if any of this is historical and what's mythological, but he was mostly a prince who lived a very sheltered life of total luxury, and had anything he wanted. And, at a certain point, sometime when he was outside the palace and he saw beggars and he saw people suffering, he was just profoundly disturbed by this. And he ended up leaving his life of luxury and traveling for years with these begging ascetic monks and seeking the answers of the truth of life. And then at some point, he sat down under the Bodhi tree and meditated. And after fighting some inner demons, he had this moment of awakening, the enlightenment, and then he began to go and teach others about how to have this kind of mindfulness. And another thing that appeals to me about Buddhism that I really love is that the idea is that everybody has Buddha nature. Buddha is not worshipped as any kind of deity, or he is respected and venerated as a guide to teach us how to find our own Buddha nature. But he's not elevated above anyone else. And the idea is that we can all be Buddhas, and we can all help spread enlightenment. And so in this type of Zen that I practice, which comes from Japan. So Buddhism spread from India into China, well, into a lot of other areas as well, but the kind of surviving threads of it mainly came through China. And there's Tibetan Buddhism also is a place where it really took hold. But then from China it moved into Japan. And so this type of Soto Zen especially is also very influenced by Taoist ideas from China. And Taoism has a very strong connection with the natural world. And that's in a strain in the Soto Zen as well. And that's something I also really love that I always found kind of missing from Christianity. It seemed very, that relationship to nature, and there was much more of like a dominant, like humans were somehow dominant. And I never liked that. I like that, like just respect and wonder that's in Zen Buddhism for the natural world. And that, and I think that Taoist strain is really a part of that. So then I went into Japan, and so that this Soto Zen that I practice in came through from Japan, and it went then to France, and then came to the United States in a temple in New Orleans. And then my teacher studied there in New Orleans, and he's from Maben, Mississippi. And when he was in New Orleans, he found the teacher there. And so he has some property out in Maben, which is it's probably 20 minutes outside of town here. And so he built his own beautiful, if you ever want to come sit with us, he built pretty much by himself this beautiful Zen dojo with, it's got floors with wood from his property and everything. But anyway, the Soto Zen, the teachers really wanted not to just have monks that were in monasteries that were practicing all the time. They really wanted to spread it more to lay people. And so they created this opportunity for lay people to take vows as a kind of a lay monk. And so I went through that process, I think about 4 or 5 years after I started sitting. But this is a long story just to say that one of the things that you do when you take those vows is that you promise that you are going to do your part to save all beings. And I think that always really appealed to me that that through my practice of sitting, I could help all of humanity. And that sounds kind of grandiose, but I guess that appealed to me because I always have had just a heart for reducing other people's suffering. And that is the message of Buddhism, is that we can reduce suffering. And so I think that is part of the appeal for me. And then I liked that instead of just having this one Christian, Christ who is supposed to be saving everybody, I like this theory that we can all help to save each other by awakening to our own true nature. And so I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to specifically say. I guess this would probably be a good time to open it up to questions if you want to. Do y'all have any questions?
So you said you're looking for a form of spirituality. So what was like, I guess, if you can remember like your criteria for what you would consider? Like if you were invited to a mosque, would you go? If you were invited to, I don't know what the hell Sikhs are into, but where they go.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I've always been open to, if someone invited me, I've been invited by Mormons, and I've gone to church with them, or Catholics. I've gone. I have been to a mosque, but not during a service, but just for an event there. But yeah, I've always just been fascinated by what people believe, and to see how they practice. And as far as the criteria, I guess for me, it wasn't really an intellectual. I guess that was the other thing I was going to say about Soto Zen, because one of the reasons that appealed to me is, again, like, they don't really focus on the intellectual part too much. Like, if you want to read all about Buddhism and study it and learn all the history, that's wonderful. You're encouraged to do it, but you're also not, it's fine if you don't want to do any of that, as long as you're sitting. And I think that appealed to me a lot because when I was younger, very intellectual and like always studying everything and trying to understand everything. And there was something that just appealed to me about like the purity of this, of like, I don't have to learn all the right answers and all that. But on the way over here, I was like, gee, I wish I knew more. Because I've really taken it to heart, like that all I have to do is really sit. And so sometimes I wish I did know more on an academic level, but maybe when I retire someday, I'll spend more time studying that stuff. But I think for me, I'm just a very intuitive person, and either something clicks with me or it doesn't. And I think that when I would leave a Christian service, I would just feel all this like tug of like, doesn't make sense, or doesn't sit right with me, or I don't, well, I like this part of it, or I like this message, but I don't like this. But then with the whenever my teacher does give a talk, which he doesn't too often, but sometimes he does share his spiritual wisdom with it. Like, it just clicks with me. Like, there's an intuitive feeling of this feels right. This feels true to me, and it feels nourishing. Whereas a lot of times, when I would leave a Christian service, I would feel like just sort of upset instead of feeling nourished and feeling like my well had been filled. And like anytime after I go to sit, I always feel more centered, more grounded, more connected to myself. And so I guess that's what's really what I was looking for in a spirituality, is something that helped me feel more at that sense of being at one with myself and being connected inward and outward, because I think that's the other part of this chatter brain mind that we have going all the time. It does isolate us from the natural world, because we can just get so caught up in our thoughts. Or now that we have full phones, we can walk around and just never even notice what's going on around us. And I notice when I meditate, I'm just much more aware than when I was like, just noticing like how the leaves are moving, in the tree branches, and, more attuned to hearing the sounds, because I am always someone who can get very distracted by my own thoughts. So that's another thing that I really love about it.
I'm going to be curious to know,
Yeah.
there is no like holy book, right? You know, I'm curious about like what a teacher like in Christianity you got a preacher who usually knows more about the Bible than that's why I can show up. Well, they show up for a lot of reasons,
Yeah.
not necessarily for the intellectual familiarity. But
Yes.
what is a teacher in Buddhism? What do they study, and what do you hope to get from them?
Yes.
You've been with this person for decades now, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So, so there is no one central book like a Bible, but there are teachings of the Buddha, and then there are a lot of Zen masters over the years who have written interpretations of the teachings.
Those have certain names. Like, is there certain like it's like the Quran, the Vedas, and that kind of stuff.
Is that the one?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know. Like I have a few years ago, I was wondering about this, and I was trying to find. And again, I've really embraced this, idea that I'm there sitting, but I would like to read more of the writings and things like that. But I don't know that there's one specific book. There may be, but I'm not. I'm not aware of what it's called or.
Is there a certain like goal? Like you mentioned, you had one particularly profound moment in meditation. Are you like trying to get back to that? Or is there like, there's clearly not like an afterlife idea. Why would somebody want to practice this?
Yes. Okay. So that's a very significant piece of the I guess the belief system, if you want to call it, is that there is no goal. The goal is there is no goal, and this is kind of particularly in another type of Zen, which is called Rinzai. They use these what they call koans, which are these riddles, and they're like these little contradictory statements that you would meditate on. And this is kind of one of those is like the goal is that there is no goal. So no, I should not sit down ever trying to get back to that experience that I had before. Because then I'm not paying attention to the present moment, and I'm supposed to be present with the phenomenon that are arising right now. So if I go in to sit down trying to get back to that place, I am immediately taking myself out of the moment of what is happening right now. So really the only goal is to sit and to be present with what is happening. And if that is I'm getting distracted thinking about what I need to buy at the grocery store, then I just notice that. And then I just bring myself back to paying attention to my breath. And that might only happen for 2 breaths if my mind is really active that day. I might, notice 2 breaths and then be distracted again. And then, it might take me a little while to realize I've been distracted. But, over time as you do it, the idea is, usually you do get a little bit better at staying tuned in for longer periods of time. But that's not the goal, but it does.
So when I forget the milk, I can tell Meredith I was really focused on.
Yeah. So, and again, just as a caveat, anything I tell you is, my own, interpretation, which may not be totally accurate to what someone else would say or more than my teacher would say about Buddhism, but that's my understanding of it. And they do actually even, the other thing is I like they have a lot of sense of humor and don't take themselves too seriously. And they kind of joke about this certain type of meditator who is always looking for that bliss. Like they get, they want to get on the cushion and get into their blissful place. They kind of tease about that because that's, again, that's nice if it happens, but that's not what
So
we're
is there a
trying
term
to
for that kind of a person? Is there like you throw Buddhist shade on people? Fosers or.
No, that's the other thing I love about this. It's so non-judgmental. And that's what, I find that a lot of Christianity is so judgmental and that you have this God that's going to judge you. And one of the things I love about Buddhism is that there's really this very open, one of the classic Buddhist stories, and a lot of the teaching is done through these kind of little stories. There's this amazing, if you want a good introduction to Buddhism, there's this amazing children's book called Zen. I think it's called Zen Panda. Zen Shorts. It's called Zen Shorts, and there's this panda who's this amazing Buddhist teacher, and he moves in next door to these kids, and he teaches them these lessons through these little stories that he tells them. But anyway, one of the classic Buddhist stories is, there's this farmer and his son has gotten drafted into the army, and all his neighbors come by and they're like, "Oh, this is terrible. I'm so sorry. This is awful." And he just says, "Well, we'll see." And then his son breaks his leg, and then everybody's like, "Oh, this is great. Now we won't have to go in the army. He's broken his leg and whatever." Not that that would necessarily be a good thing in other circumstances, but, and he's just like, "Oh, okay, we'll see," and then his horse runs away, and everybody's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you lost your horse." And he's like, "Well, we'll see." And then the horse comes back, and he's brought something, and it's good. And, so it just goes back and forth this way, through the story. And this is the idea being that, we often think we know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but really we can't. Everything has so many different ramifications to it that you can't really judge, and it's not always useful to do that, to assume that we know that something's good or something's bad. And I think that doesn't mean we don't discern that, if someone's doing something evil, we don't just say like, "Oh, no judgment," it's not that kind of thing. But it's the idea that, our mind is so quick to think it knows. And if we can suspend that judgment for a little while and just be still and make space, to let things arise before we decide, I think if there's,
I was interested when you were talking about, you said there's not really a goal, but you did kind of mention this, you like to think that you're reducing suffering in the world.
mm-hmm.
It actually reminded me, years ago, I did a retreat at a Catholic monastery, Trappist monastery in Kentucky, Yosemite. And that was my impression, was that part of the reason why people want to live this monastic life is because they think that their prayers are going to somehow reduce the suffering in the world. And my question is, how confident are you that there's actually a connection between your prayers and, do you think that's really the case, or?
Well, I do, in the sense that I think that the more any one person is able to sit with their own pain and to reduce their kind of shadow self that they project onto other people, the more you do that, the more that ripples out. So I think, and this I'm also influenced, which is interesting because my Zen teacher also had this interest. I'm very interested in the psychological theories of Carl Jung. And my teacher was also very influenced by him. And I was kind of interested in that you're in this little place in Starkville City, we both have the same interests. But so I guess, so a lot of my thinking is also influenced by Jung's ideas about the collective unconscious and the shadow and things like that. So I see my Zen practice in part as a way of coming to terms with my own shadow. And I do believe that every person who is more aware, more centered, more connected, has dealt with their own painful material in a significant way, is much less likely to inflict their inner pain on others by being cruel, by being greedy, by being by othering people and thinking that they are separate and it doesn't matter how you treat someone else because it has nothing to do. I just think that all that work that we're doing as we sit is helping to heal our psyches and making us much less likely to inflict damage on other people as we go out into the world. And I really do believe that that ripples out. And I do, I do believe that we have this collective repository of consciousness, and that, this idea that the more people awaken, the more that ripples out. Just like the more that people are afraid, and you see this in a society, if an authoritarian leader comes into power, they spread fear. And when they spread fear, more and more people, isolate. They won't help other people because they're afraid that's going to come back on them. And you can see how that spreads. And just how that spreads, I also think that if we are coming from a place of love and acceptance and more enlightened space, that also ripples out. And so I think it's can be an antidote to evil in a certain way. And I think something else I wanted to say about that, that collective consciousness. So that's a little like Jungian in with my Buddhism, but and I can say, do people understand what I mean when I say the shadow?
Yes,
Okay, yes,
I don't necessarily know what that means.
okay.
it's like a Carl Jung, yeah.
Not for me, yeah.
Yeah, so this idea is that, every human being has within us the potential to do horrible, evil things just like any other human being does, just like we all have the potential to do loving and caring things. And that's within all of us. And that if we do not acknowledge that, and we do not come to terms with that shadow part, that unacceptable part, that we're, in Christianity is seen as Satan and the devil, and seen as an outside force that comes to negative influence. Like in Jung's conception, that is within each one of us, and it's our job to work with that shadow material and to acknowledge it and to bring it out of the darkness, and acknowledge it to ourselves, so that because if we don't, what we tend to do is to project it onto somebody else. So you see this all the time. There's an amazing book written by Alice Miller, I believe her name is, and she kind of looks at at Hitler's childhood and a lot of his issues, and she demonstrates how a lot of his experiences as a child, you can see how he took, he was, a tiny part Jewish, and he hated that part of himself, and he took that and on the world stage, like projected that out. These people are awful, they're horrible. And, got his whole culture to go along with that and to project that evil that they were doing, projecting that these are the evil people. And so we're justified to do these horrible things to them. And so I guess that in, as we sit with ourselves and the emotions that arise, we see these things, our own jealousy, our greed, our anger, and to be able to accept those instead of shaming ourselves for them and trying to stuff them away, but then unconsciously acting them out on other people. If we can come to terms with those and integrate them, then we can consciously deal with those impulses when they come up and make informed decisions about how to handle them instead of just acting out of these sort of instinctual impulses. That makes sense.
What's the time commitment for a meditator such as yourself, or when I think about Buddhism, I do think about Tibetan monks
Yes.
up on mountains somewhere. That's all they do.
Right. Yeah. So it completely varies. And again, I like this. It's like it's individual choice. So ideally, the recommendation is that if you're going to have a dedicated practice, that you would sit every day for, at least 20 minutes, preferably 30 minutes. That's what's recommended. But again, it's totally up to you what you want to do. And I will say, like, I have gone through periods of time when I have meditated every day, and I definitely see the benefit in my life when I do that. But then there's other times when I get busy and I don't, and I'm just meditating even once a week when I go to the dojo. But there again, you're just always invited back to incorporate it into your life. And that was the whole point of the teacher who decided that he wanted to ordain lay people is, it's okay. You can still have a day-to-day life and have a practice as well. But there's room for the whole gamut of people who dedicate their whole life to just sitting, and people who, even if you practice some mindfulness for 5 minutes a day, that's going to have a benefit. And I'm a mental health counselor, so I also know that there are a lot of research proven benefits, even to just meditating for 5 minutes a day. They can show physiological differences in stress levels and stress hormones and things like that. So I know that, and it's something I recommend to my clients to incorporate some kind of, you see it a lot now, it's called mindfulness. And my Zen teacher has a little bit of, he really likes to make a distinction that what we're doing is a spiritual practice. It's not just, meditating to reduce stress. We are seeking kind of that deeper spiritual truth. But then again, that contradicts the idea that we have no goal. So I should probably have him come talk to you because he will give you better information than what I'm giving. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I was going to follow up with mindfulness meditation stuff because that's Sam Harris. I know he's got a whole podcast.
Yeah, and you can find there are tons of apps.
Apple Watch will actually track your breathing and make sure you're breathing out long enough. It keeps reading time.
Okay. Yeah, and so and there's Headspace, Insight Timer, and there's a bunch of different apps now and things. But again, something in me resists this idea that we, want to have a certain amount of time that we're breathing or whatever, because the idea is, again, to watch what's noticing. So if I go and I sit and I notice that I'm having really rapid, shallow breath, that's some information for me. But if I instead just, try to match my breathing to the watch, I may be missing out on some important information about what's going on with me because I'm trying to impose this external thing instead of watching what's actually happening with me. Yeah.
Does Zen Buddhism have any views on the mind or the soul?
Yes. So, that's something what you had mentioned earlier. Yeah. So, in Buddhism, there is a belief in reincarnation. So, and again, my teacher doesn't emphasize this very much. And actually, when I was going to take the vows, one of the things that I said to him is, I don't know if I can take these vows because I don't know if I believe in reincarnation. So one of the things that's always been interesting for me is that I'm never someone who's been willing to just go wholeheartedly in on anything. I don't, and I think sometimes I envy people who can just choose a belief and go with it. They're just going to go all the way in. There's always some part of me that's I'm not really sure that that's true. So I think the idea of reincarnation is interesting. And I like the idea that you could get more than one lifetime to learn, because there's so much to learn about how to be a human being. I think it could take multiple lifetimes. And so I find that intriguing. But then I'm also from a physics standpoint, how would that work? like, where would the soul go and how to hang out and how would know when to come back. But anyway, that is a belief in Buddhism. But what my teacher told me, he kind of had the same answer that my dad had when I said, am I going to hell? He said, like, well, this is a mythology, and you don't have to believe any given part of the mythology. You can take, what is useful to you. And as long as you want to be committed to sitting, that's what you're really committing to. So you're not committing to, but one of the vows is that you will continue to reincarnate. Because the idea is, and again, I don't know all that much about this, but the idea is that there's these different, I guess, levels that you can reach in your enlightenment. And if you became fully awakened, you would leave that cycle of birth and death. So you would stop reincarnating once you got to a certain level. So one of the vows you're taking is that even if you reach that level, you're not going to leave the cycle until everyone else, all the other human beings have also awakened, so that everyone can reach that level together. So you will keep bringing your wisdom back into the world over and over to try to help others. So that's interesting. That scared me a little bit. I was like, I'm not sure. I don't know if I want to keep coming back. But I like the idea of not, not going until you've gotten everybody with you. So
You're stuck in samsara with the rest of them.
Exactly.
What happens if you break a vow?
Like leaving samsara.
Yeah. So also had a talk with this about my teacher, and again, he uses his philosophy on this is, there's no God waiting to punish you because you broke the vow. These are this is guidance. It's guidance.
Thank you for
Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. So, again, we're practicing. We're not perfect, we're practicing. So, we will mess it up at times, and that's, it's part of it.
Have you ever made a salmon doll?
No, I haven't. I've seen that, and again, and so there's a big, emphasis on the idea of impermanence. And that's part of what we're doing is trying to accept, the constant change. When they talk a lot about letting go of attachments, that one of the reasons that we suffer is because we get attached to things. We get attached to an identity. I'm a therapist. I'm a football coach. I'm a banker. Well, what happens if you can't do that anymore? If you get fired from your job or you lose all your clients or whatever, and then you don't have that identity anymore, we can't be attached. If we are attached to those things, we're going to suffer. And so, continually letting go of our fixed ideas of how things should be, and adapting to things as they are.
That was it's actually kind of a key memory for me. The salmon doll is I was going to the Birmingham Art Museum with a school trip, and they had, I think he was Jainist, he may not have been, but he had the robes and he was doing a salmon doll for everyone. He had a little plaque explaining what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It just floored me that it was all going to wind up in the
He
bottom.
spent all that. they'll spend sometimes, I don't know, days making those.
I was trying to figure out some way to preserve it. I was thinking you could do resin, and just the more I thought of it, the more I realized they really set it up to be impermanent. It was such a good display.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is,
Who was it?
yes.
I'd love to hear a question from you. Do you have a question?
I missed the first half.
Okay.
Well, the first section where you got into it. So I'm curious to see. I'm curious about how you exactly became a Buddhist.
Yeah, so I had some experiences with meditating when I was in college, and I found them profound. Then I was going through a divorce in 2010, and I was really struggling, and I just felt like I wanted some some kind of spiritual anchor. And so, like I said, I cannot remember how I found out that there was a Zen dojo here. I was floored by it. But I started going, and that's how, and I really connected with the teacher, Tony, because he did, have a lot of similar interests to me and similar philosophy, very much a, live and let live kind of person. Yeah, and I just found the practice just very grounding and comforting. And also like I say it's a good religion for introverts, because like when we have a sesshin day where we eat meals together, you're really not supposed to talk all day unless you have to exchange information about something that's happening. You need to ask a question about the food, or if you're clean, you need to ask for rags or something. Other than that, you're really not supposed to talk. So, as an introvert, I think that very much appeals to me because I don't have to make small talk with people. So it's just, but it is kind of an odd feeling, when you're not used to that and you sit down. You can feel like almost more self-conscious when you're all just sitting there and just hearing the noises of each other eating and not saying anything. But again, it's because you're supposed to be focusing on the taste of the food and the experience of the smells and everything like that. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Well, Lizzie, you're raised by a Buddhist home, is that correct? Or
I was like, my parents are more devout than I am. Like, it's always been periphery, but I've never. Well, I've been to a couple of retreats, but they were always focused on the way of life rather than the actual religious aspect of it. It's like, they would talk about love, how that affects people, how that changes people, how your love can bring people closer to you, how disconnected, being disconnected from your own life can distance the distance between you and the one you appreciate. I was thinking about, because when we were talking about how, okay, so Tony, your dojo, do you only go to that dojo? Do you ever go to other Buddhist places?
I haven't very much. I did go to the one in New Orleans when it was, actually, I don't think it's there anymore. But I did go to that one once. And I've always wanted to go to, Thich Nhat Hanh has Magnolia Grove, which is in like Batesville, Mississippi. And I've heard amazing things, wonderful things about that. And I just have not, I'm going to get over there one day. I have not been there.
Services in Vietnamese. That's
Okay.
places I've been to,
Mhm.
as well as one in Jackson. They
Mhm.
only do Vietnamese ones, but there's also down in the Biloxi area,
Mhm.
but those are all like Vietnamese Buddhists. Like I was wondering if just tell me how which area that is.
Yeah, so he's doing Soto Zen, which is, it's very small. In America, there are not very many, because it really only, his teacher, Robert, was in New Orleans. And then Tony has this one. I don't know that I don't know how many, I think there's a few other people that were students of Robert that became, have their own dojos, but there's not very many. It's not one of the more popular in America. So yeah, I think that like the Thich Nhat Hanh and the Vietnamese Buddhism is more known, and then there's a lot of, I think there's quite a few like Rinzai tradition out in California, especially, I think. But again, like I am not very knowledgeable on all the different schools or anything like that. So,
I'm kind of curious if you were kind of raised in it. For me, because I'm grown up in a dominant Christian-dominated culture, where it's pretty easy to indoctrinate because there is a scripture, and quite often, that's then used to, essential, that becomes the the thing that is wielded against you, you know, if you were to
Yes.
walk away. And it doesn't seem like, you know, certainly like culturally, if your entire family meditates or believes in reincarnation, I guess walking away could have the same kind of repercussions. You know, there's some kind of social commitment or social pressure to remain in the belief system, but
There's not really a social pressure
Yeah.
to stay to practice it, but there is a social pressure to preserve the tradition. Like, my uncle's like me, he wasn't really into religion, but when he died, it suddenly became, and it was everywhere for a little bit. Like, his family started donating all their things to help raise his karma. Oh, like it said, you're reincarnated after your death, and based on how the good you did and the good that your family did before you died and after you died can affect where exactly you end up.
right.
And it's where exactly you end up after you're reincarnated is like kind of debated. Like my dad's always like, yeah, if you kill a fly, you're gonna end up as a fly eventually. But like, you kill so many flies along the way, you're gonna end up as like a lot. And like, if you kill a person, you're gonna end up as one of the sports. And then you're gonna end up back in the cycle over and over again. There isn't really there is an idea of ascension, but there is an idea that you're probably not there. You're gonna get churned over it.
Takes a while. Yeah. So is your family Vietnamese?
Yeah, I have
Okay. Yeah, and then I know that it's very, you know, like any religion, it blends with the beliefs that were there already, and so it can look very different from, you know, from one country to another, or one tradition to another.
Right, I mean, kind of things like, you know, in a country like America where it doesn't have a foothold, it's really is a minority
Right.
kind of thing. How does it grow? Like, you know, is there a Buddhist Bible camp? You know, because that's how, you know, kids, you know, are kind of
Right.
you know, brought up in it, you know, and what does that look like? Or, you know, how many kids or how many families are involved at the dojo? Or is it mostly people who have kind of learned about this as
Yeah.
adults? And
It's just adults, really. And I mean, my teacher welcomed me. I took my kids with me for a while, and he welcomed them. Like they'd come and just sit for like the first 5 minutes when they were pretty small, you know, and then they would go out and, you know, do something out in the dojo. And he used to have one here in Starkville that was just in his house, his Starkville house. But now he just lives out in Maven, and he built that one out there. But you know, they would just sit in the living room and play while I finished. But just got busy with life, and since there weren't other families and there weren't other children, it, you know, it wasn't as compelling. And that's one thing that I do. One thing I was going to say is, I would say that Zen tends to attract a lot more men than it does women, and so like I will see that there's a group in Jackson. My teacher goes to Jackson also, and like once a month, and they have their own dojo down there, and they'll come up here for the sessions for the weekends, and you know, I would say it's like 9 out of 10 men.
Mhm.
We you know, there's a couple of women that come pretty regularly, but and right now at our dojo,
Our community suffers from the same problem with never. So that's why I'm so glad to be with women.
yeah, and I'm not sure, you know, what all is for the reason for that. If part of it is because there isn't so much of a social aspect to it. I mean, we always talk after the session, you know, Tony will break out the beers and chips, and you know, we'll sit around and chat a little bit. So it's not like we never speak to each other, but it doesn't have as much of a social component as like, say, a Christian, you know, church would have. And of course, partly that's because ours is so small. I mean, really, honestly, we have 3 people that are, besides the teacher, that are frequently coming, you know, to ours. And so I think the biggest we've ever had like regularly coming is like 6 people.
Mhm.
So, you know, and then I think the group down in Jackson has like 6 or 8 people also that regularly come. So it's a very small group. So that's part of the reason. But it's not a proselytizing religion, you know, that people are not out there trying to convert people. So it's just people who hear about it and get interested and gravitate toward it. And that's just how we get, you know, and Tony never did anything to advertise or try to get students besides, you know, I don't know if he still does, but he had the little announcement in the paper. There's like a church page with all the different churches, and he had a little thing in there. And then he has his website, but, you know, he doesn't try to promote it. It's just people who are looking and seeking and find him, you know, and find it. And we have a lot of people who come once or twice, but then they don't stick with it. So usually if we get someone who comes back 3 times, then they usually stick. But but we got a lot of people who, you know, it's great. You know, we welcome anyone. Like I had that experience in college, and then I didn't follow up on it until, you know, I don't know, 20 years later. So
That turnover rate is actually something a lot of larger churches also have, like the Christian ones. My dad's a pastor, and so he's very, like, one thing he would always kind of talk to me about is just the mechanics of how people actually flow through organizations. So like the retention rate is something you really try to get out as a pastor to, you know,
right.
keep everything flowing.
What denomination is he?
He went to New Orleans Theological Seminary, so he has a Baptist background.
Okay.
About 10 years ago, he made the church in Meridian non-denominational, which everyone was fine with. They weren't even officially part of the Baptist thing anyway.
Okay.
And he also pastors a smaller dying church that is old school Baptist, but all the members are old and tired, so there's no conflict there.
Okay. Yeah. And so, why did you leave the fold?
Yes. What makes you think that?
No, it's right. We do have some Christians. Mostly it was the culture I was kind of brought up with, and this wasn't necessarily something like that was my dad's doing. It was just something he went along with because he didn't see it as a problem. Was like there was this emphasis on literalism almost in reading the Bible and its interpretations. And there was also like you mentioned, the emphasis on like hell and, you know, atonement and sin, etc. The more I learned about how the actual text was compiled, the more I learned about like how things work, the more the cultural and like just sort of customs I grew up with stopped being able to act as an explanation for how things worked. And the more I tried to dive deep into like, you know, go beyond the culture and go to actually what did the Bible say, the less it became to me as a reliable or suitable mechanism for it. I became to see it as more, like you said earlier, like mythological things. Like I still love it. I still like, you know, watch videos on it and stuff. There's a really good YouTube series. Her name is Dr. Hayes at Yale. She goes over like the Old Testament's composition. I love that, but I couldn't believe it more, so I don't.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but just
No.
there's a lot of other stuff.
You know, like the kind of Christianity I grew up in was not quite, but closer to maybe the type Frank Turek. He was here a few weeks ago from us, and in the Q&A section, I got into a little argument with him about does he endorse stoning. He wound up falling on the side of pro-stoning, funnily enough. Yeah.
Okay.
So that kind of gives you the flavor.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've always been more interested in sort of like the mystical, like reading about the Gnostics, you know, that appeals to me. Or like in Judaism, if you read about the Kabbalah, like that appeals to me. But it's always the mystical ones that are the ones that attract me more than the.
There's a YouTube channel you may like, Esoterica.
Okay.
Dr. Dustin Sledge, he has a PhD in like magic, and he goes over pretty much every system and like your history.
PhD in magic?
Yes.
I think that's a PhD.
He studies magic and esoteric history. Like he's got like he actually translated some work of Agrippa that wasn't translated well in the 40s recently. So he and another guy did a correct translation of like his albums and stuff. So he's more of a historian, but all he does is magic.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. So anyway, I guess that's all I've got for now. I hope that's what you're looking for. So.
Thank you. I'm Paul. So that actually my